All right, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. I would like to thank you so very much for your patience, particularly those on Patreon. I know I shaved, got a little bit of a nicer shirt on. The next thing that's going to be changing, believe it or not, is going to be the background. And I say this because, unfortunately, I cannot say anything yet, but let's just say that knock on wood, assuming the show continues in the way in which it's going, there's going to be a lot of things that will be increasing very quickly to the extent in which I will have to start looking a little more, I guess you could say, professional, if you will. With that being said, let's jump into it. So today is the first amongst many other episodes that will be released, and it is the Let's Get Banned episode. Now, I very strongly encourage you folks to check out this episode before you watch the Black Cube episode and even before you watch the Archon episode. And I say that because this will serve as the prerequisite or the entry point for a lot of what we're going to be looking at in sort of more of the esoteric angle of things shortly. But we have a lot to cover here and I'm extremely excited. So today's title is called I've Been Mistaking the Map for the Territory. We have internal sigils and dark matter is a bedsheet. And you'll see exactly why I say that shortly. Now, before I do that, I want to start with a quote by Sean Cahill, and I asked Sean if I could use this quote, and he gave me the go-ahead. Essentially, he said to me a little while ago, you know, Dave, and I just have my notes here to read for you, poking the beast brings enlightenment, but first you must traverse resistance. So this speaks to me on a lot of different levels, because I think ultimately why a lot of you folks are here, regardless of your age, regardless of where you are in life, is because you want to know what's coming next, what will come, what could not come, what's the worst case scenario, what's the best case scenario. And I've really been trying to do my best to think about that this past week, amongst many other things, because a lot of you, have said, Dave, you know, your content is fantastic. We need to make it more applicable. And I would say, you know what? I couldn't agree more. So what I've come to realize is that one way in which we can actually utilize a lot of this is by thinking about it throughout our daily lives. And when I say thinking about it, I mean thinking about questioning and understanding your internal sovereignty. So for example, instead of focusing outwards as you're shopping and trying to, you know, judge someone or think about a particular material object, instead, ask yourself internally, what am I going through right now that could make me more aware and in the moment and even more happier, or bring me towards the goal in which I want to achieve, whether it's a long-term goal or a short-term goal, if it's simple as getting from the grocery store that you're in to the car. And I really do mean that. Why? Because from an esoteric perspective, it allegedly takes anywhere from, it depending who you ask, 3 to 15% of any given population within a particular geographical vicinity, with relative to the energies that we on the surface cannot see, to become enlightened or awakened. And you'll see what I mean by that shortly. And I don't mean to confuse you folks, but one thing that seems to occur here relative to disclosure of the ET and UFO agenda is that at worst, there's going to be basically a very, very broken planet society. At best, a lot of people are going to break free of this trap in which we are allegedly in. But honestly, let's break all of this down from both a nuts and bolts and from an esoteric perspective. So first and foremost, let me just minimize my screen here. But when I said in the beginning of the title, for those on Telegram, I actually put this up a few days ago relative to the day I'm recording this, which is that, again, are we mistaking the map for the territory? Now, before we get into that, first, we need to take a look here at bilderberg.org/secret.htm, The Secret Western Government, Secret Shadow Government, A Structural Analysis by Richard Boylan, PhD. Now, some of you who are on the Telegram have seen this already, but I wanted to essentially go through some of this as it pertains to certain roles in which are played and how we can essentially attack those roles via our consciousness. And when I say consciousness, I literally mean our conscious thoughts. I'm not trying to be overly vague or anything like this. So let's see here. The Freemasonic Secret Society network is intrinsically interwoven into all levels of society structure: banking, business, police, military, politics, legal system, education, mass media, religion, medical and pharmaceutical industry, illegal drug running and distribution, organized crime, which unfortunately I know a bit about, and last but not least, the major think tanks and manipulators of the masses, the intelligence agencies. Okay, so we see over here at the top of this pyramid that is a metaphorical pyramid representing society, right? We have, again, police, MI5, CIA, FBI, all of that. Then you have non-Freemasons, which belong to each, which are, fill up the vast majority of these institutions. Granted, there's still a handful of individuals that are Freemasons in there. Those Freemasons seem to then report to the Freemasonic Brotherhood members, which then pass it up the chain into what's called the Illuminated Elite, the gatekeepers, if you will. These would be the same individuals that literally have dinner with private industry, I guess you could say leaders, corporate individuals, military industrial complex individuals, and some of them are exactly that. But here's the thing. What happens is that the Archmasons, which they're not allegedly not the Freemasons, the Archmasons, let me just be clear, are directly involved in black magic power rituals and pedophilia. This would substantiate Michael Aquino back in the day and all of that, pertaining to sort of the old guard, if you will, of the Atomic Energy Commission, and would explain why today the United States Air Force is refusing to come out with any of its, I guess you could say, quote-unquote knowledge or data pertaining to UFOs, UAP, and the phenomenon. Now, if we scroll down a little bit here, is that the core of democracy, pointing to the inside of this pyramid here, is directly involved in the use of neuro-electromagnetic frequency weapons against innocent members of society and the structuring and control of pedophile rings. Why pedophile rings? Right off the bat, it's the easiest thing to get people on. All you need to do is put people in positions of power that are pedophiles, or, again, are attracted to individuals, male or female, regardless, that are quite young of age. There you go. It's done. You film them, and that's it. It's over. It's all over. There's no other way in which it could be. You can sort of that people could wiggle out of it. Now, on yesterday's Zoom call, as of the day I'm recording this, we went through, again, the executive branch, the intelligence branch, right, the NRO and all of this, right, the War Department, and essentially what we're seeing here, again, of course, also the weapons industry branch, private contractors. This is a beautiful expose, in my humble opinion, of even loosely describing what the I guess you could say, shadow intentions are of these agencies and corporations. Let me be clear. I'm not saying everyone at these agencies and corporations are, in fact, again, bad people. Not at all. That's not what I'm saying whatsoever. Again, factions fund factions. We must keep that in mind. Now, here's what's interesting, all right? A lot of people don't know this. Starting in April 2018, okay, some of the Earth's and world's largest telescopes shut down, interestingly enough, right, for maintenance, yada, yada, you name it. Shortly after, at the beginning of COVID, of the pandemic, of April 2020, March, April, May, over 100 telescopes around the world, of the Earth's most powerful telescopes, all shut down. Allegedly, they all claimed it was due to COVID. There was actually an unofficial front that was made from these bodies of institutions saying, we had to shut down the telescopes due to COVID, right? Everyone had to go home and stay safe, yada, yada. Okay, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, granted. But hold on a second. You had to shut down a telescope in 2018 because of a virus that didn't show up 2 years later? What the hell was in the sky or in the ionosphere that was so detectable these agencies would not have been able to cover it up? This is what I think. So let's take a look at this right over here. Alien abducted Irishman, according to howandwise.com, and told him the world would end in 850 years. This is partly what I mean by I've been mistaking the map for the territory. I'm guilty of this too. Don't kid yourself, folks. So take a look at this. A retired carpenter named Gary Battle, 65, claimed that he'd been abducted by aliens while coming home after Christmas drinks in Pallaskenry, a village in County Limerick, Ireland, on December 26, 2001. The aliens warned him that the Earth would end by an asteroid with the size of Munster in 850 years. Alright, so in 2016, Gary told the Limerick Post what had happened to him in 2001. He literally described, again, he drew some pictures of some of the beings and what their faces look like. We see here some of the aliens asked him when he was abducted, are you afraid? He replied with, no, I am not, should I be? Right? We see here, if we zoom in a little bit, we'll see some of the drawings in which he drew to describe the faces in which he was in which his abductors looked like. So now, if we jump back a little bit, we see here that Gary claimed the alien told him they're 4 million light years more advanced than humans, and they have been observing us for thousands of years. All right? Now, here's the thing. On Stephen's night, 2001, the alien warned him that an asteroid the size of Munster, which is a city in Germany, originating from the 35th quadrant, would end our world in 850 years. And to give you guys a timescale, 19 years have passed since the message was conveyed. And I quote, the alien allegedly said to Mr. Gary, I laugh when I say this, but I take this seriously because the more people I speak to, I can now confidently say I have multiple sources within government. The more people I speak to, the more this seems to be the case. But again, they could be BSing me. Let's also be very clear here. Let's notice. Let's take a look. And I quote, the alien allegedly said to Mr. Gary, in all that time, you have only excelled at two things: global warfare and lying to your own species. You must use the Force, be one with the Force, harness the Force, the alien said. Again, I know we think of Star Wars right away, but have we thought that maybe the concept of Star Wars has been that of an ideological drip feeding relative to that of something that we have been knocked on the head with pertaining to, amnesia within our own species? Now, here's what's also just as interesting in my opinion. According to Gary, the alien told him that the government and the banks tell lies to people because they are a hidden agenda and we should not trust them. He also forewarned that impending global financial crisis and told me that if we do not change our ways, we're going to end up like the dinosaurs. Interesting. Didn't we just look at this right over here about the shadow government? Again, intelligence, banking, all of it is here. Energy, the energy sector, you name it. All right. Now, take a look at this. According to him, the aliens use dark matter or dark energy to hide in the universe. This is what I find quite peculiar. Why do I say this? Because I'm not going to play any videos just because there's been so many, but do folks remember the tether incident from the 90s? NASA attempted a tether of sorts, a mechanism that, again, this tether was completely broken off and then a bunch of craft just showed up. We can argue they were teleporting and things like this, but we also have to consider, again, the fact that these craft were moving in a way in which seemed to dictate that there was some type of liquid-type fluid within what we call space. But here's the thing. If we presume, okay, not assume, but if we presume that these alleged Orion Dracos, these reptilians, I'm not trying to stick to labels, let me be very clear, I'm trying to be as neutral as I can, but if we were to presume for a moment that these extraterrestrials were to entrap our planet, there would be a way in which you would want to put some type of layer either around or over top, again, the planet in which you are trying to mess with. So this is what makes me think in quite a peculiar way. Could quote-unquote dark matter be the bed sheet, the top layer, like when you're doing your bed, where you're placing the bed sheet on top of the bed and there's a couple sheets underneath it, right? Could dark matter, or again, whatever you want to call it, the inorganic space or space liquid, whatever you want to refer to it as, could it be the blanket in which there are beings in which are hiding under it? Not invisibility, but under it. Let me explain to you what I mean very quickly. So let's take a look. Let's go back to Eric Davis's PDF here, and a teleportation PDF written in 2003. Here's what we'll notice. For example, he talks about how you can make anti-gravity and stargates. This is a public document, so take a look. He then explains all of it. I'm going to skip through that, but Mr. Eric Davis says, this result is in fact the primary matter energy requirement for traversable wormholes. Okay, as was proved by Morris and Thorne and later by Visser, within the paradigm of classical Einstein general relativity. Okay, the negative surface tension, which is positive outward pressure, aka gravitational repulsion or anti-gravity, is needed to keep the throat open and stable against a collapse. The reader should not be alarmed at this result. Negative energies and negative stress tensions are an acceptable result both mathematically and physically, and they manifest gravitational repulsion in and around the wormhole throat. One only needs to understand what it means for stress energy to be negative within the proper context. In general relativity, the term exotic is used in place of negative. Again, in short, negative energy arises from Heisenberg's quantum uncertainty principles, which requires that the energy density of any electromagnetic, magnetic, electric, or other fields must fluctuate randomly. Even in a vacuum, where the average energy density is 0, the energy density fluctuates. Okay, let me be very clear here. You want to talk about propaganda? This word right over here, negative or dark, was used in place of exotic. Now, what does that mean? It literally means that, again, this goes back to James C. Maxwell's alleged interpretation by Heinrich Hertz, Oliver Heaviside and those guys there. The alleged interpretation where James Maxwell had variables representing other dimensions. But those guys, those quote-unquote fantastic interpreters, they removed those variables that would have mathematically allowed for one to use science in this physical world to access those other dimensions, which, by the way, would corroborate a handful of other things here pertaining to about how motherships stay close to certain, I guess you could say, planets, if you will. Now, why do I say that? So, here's the interesting thing about all of this. I would dare to say that when we take a look at dark matter, negative matter, whatever you want to call it, replace that word with exotic. What does your brain, what does your mind now think from a visualization perspective? Your mind, in my humble opinion, now begins to think, okay, hold on. If I apply the word exotic to what's up there in the sky that we think is just all darkness, could it be that there's another type of maybe blanket or bed sheet underneath the top sheet where the universe is teeming with life? Now, again, that's a metaphor. In reality, those bed sheets would be frequencies. Okay? This would explain why, in certain mathematics, I want to say very quickly, we see here, there's a term called disco realism. And I know that sounds funny, but what we'll find, actually, I have it right here. Sonification of a real-time physics simulation within a virtual environment, and we have here disco elysium and magical realism. The professor in which I took it from called it disco realism. Long story short, you know what all those, goobly gobbly terms mean essentially? It's a term to describe what calculations can do, but geometry cannot. How come calculations are able to substantiate certain forms of mathematics like here, but then you have other instances where, even in this report, Eric Davis has to then write out this part of it. Why did he write it out? Why didn't he do this? Why didn't he just show the math to provide it? You might say, Dave, this is the math to provide it. All due respect, I don't think it's all of it. So either A, because the work is classified because it's true, or B, Dr. Eric Davis, one of the most respected physicists, not just in America, but around the world, is just a lazy person, and he decided to write out the rest of it using English instead of math. Although apparently math is much easier for him to do than write English. Because again, being a scientist, you're not an English writer, you're a scientist. Again, do you see what I'm saying, folks? It's right in front of us. It's not what's here in this document, it's what's not here. It's the lack of what's here. Does that make sense, guys? Okay, now, the reason why certain equations here could be written on paper, but it cannot be visualized in a geometric sense, is because for those that watch Dan Winters' work, you'll see that there's only so many ways one can manifest a shape until the limits of the dimensions that we're in hit a wall. Speaking of hitting a wall, we can argue that we're living within a wall, or as I said earlier, a bed sheet. Now, do you folks remember those secret space program motherships that we look at quite often on the Zoom calls that I've showed, I think, in members episodes? I can't bring it up here because this is going on YouTube and I'm going to get copyrighted. Those images are copyrighted. So unfortunately, I can't bring them up. But do you remember those motherships that allegedly stay very, very far from Earth? Okay, according to multiple secret space program whistleblowers, a couple in which we've had on the show actually, they claim that the motherships have a totally different form or mechanism of gravitational control and pull, which means that essentially these motherships cannot get close to certain planets or other planets. Not that they can't, they could. It's just it would be inconvenient for the mothership to do so because the mothership is made for extremely long distance travel. Even may in fact be living quarters, just like in Star Trek, people full on live on these ships, and they don't have a home planet in some cases. Now, here's what's interesting about all of this. Those motherships, all right, that usually are very blocky on one end and then very thin on the other end, this is what gets real interesting, folks. These motherships allegedly stay close to different planets, and the sun is also allegedly a portal too, but we'll delve into that later. They stay close to different planets that are not Earth because the motherships are not made necessarily to land on planets. Sort of like in the movie Dune, if you remember the big mothership that deployed the smaller craft so they could, when the Atrikis family, whatever their name was called, was landing on the planet, that big cigar mothership craft that they never landed on the surface of the new planet they were going to. Same thing, except it would have to be hidden, in my humble opinion. Now, again, Notice, by the way, as well, there were no propulsion mechanisms within that movie. I'm talking about the new movie Dune, so it seems to be a little bit of drop feeding there. But point being, okay, those motherships stay close to other planets' orbits because other planets, this is not a conspiracy, this is fact, other planets emit different frequencies at different speeds. Okay, now check this out. What I've decided to do, please excuse me, I know it looks like a child drew it, but this was my drawing. I did a little sketch with a mouse, a little bit hard to do, so thank you for bearing with me. Okay, this I would like to thank Mr. Alexei Novitsky, who's going to be coming back on the show quite avidly, because, I mean, he's a great guy, and we'll be doing some great things together. Okay, now, you see this red dot here, folks? Pretend this red dot is Earth, all right? Let me just check the viewing screen so you could see it. Perfect. Pretend this red dot is Earth. This purple dot, all right, is, let's just say, a mothership on a different dimension. These loops, or these lines, represent different frequencies in which we and other beings sit on. Okay, now there's more than just 4 different dimensions, frequencies, and each dimension operates at a different frequency or vibrates at a different frequency. But there's obviously an unlimited or infinite amount, but I'm just using a small amount just to give you folks a condensed relative example. So for those on the Zoom calls, we've been through this. Please forgive me, I sound like a broken record here, but point being, the closer or the more dense you vibrate down into the lower realms, the faster the orbit that the planet emits. So those motherships stay close to the rings of Saturn. I think there's also another reason for the rings of Saturn there, but they also stay close to Pluto. They stay close to Venus. Why? Because those planets vibrate at a much faster rate, and the faster they vibrate, the shorter their wavelengths, because a wavelength, when moving quickly, goes like this. Jump, 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 right? And then a wavelength moving slowly is very spaced out, wave up. You see, nice and easy. Right? That's the difference. What you need to vibrate quickly and densely is this vibration right here, moving quickly. Which planets emit that? Oh, I don't know, Saturn, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, you name it, right? Now, here's what's interesting. Say these aliens, these ETs go, they say we want to visit Earth. Right? But instead of, holy crap, we got to travel, because again, this is to scale, right? We got to travel thousands, if not millions of kilometers, pretending they measure in that way, or miles. And then we have to line ourselves up with where Earth is on the other dimension and then vibrate down. Holy crap, that's a tough job to do. There's a much easier way to do it. The lower, remember what I said, the lower you go, the faster the vibrational waves are, as we see right here. There's more spikes, they're not as spaced out. They occur more rapidly and avidly. One way to do it would be this mothership. Let me just actually change the color here. Forgive me so we don't get confused. There we go, I'll use blue. This mothership ends up vibrating down into the lowest or one of the lower vibrational states, because when you're in this vibrational state and this dimension, moving, say, 5 kilometers to the right to then vibrate to get to Earth is quicker than if you had to go, say, 5 million kilometers to the right and then vibrate down. Does that make sense, guys? I hope that makes sense. So again, we see here, vibrating down and then moving just, again, because it's all relative. Right? This speaks to Dan Winter's concept of the spin of the circle, going in and then compressing and then extracting and compressing and extracting. This goes right into that. What we see here is that, again, let me give you a perfect example. You're let's just say me and Scott. Let's just say me, Scott, and Katria. We're on a craft, right? And we want to get here. What we'll do is we'll drop right down, because getting to this dimension and moving just a little bit is moving just 5 kilometers to the right in this dimension is equal to moving, say, 500,000 in this one. So you've saved God knows how much time. I hope that makes sense. Now, we can corroborate that with how Eric Davis says here, negative energies and negative stress tensions are an acceptable result both mathematically and physically, and they manifest anti-gravity. Right? Not only this, but again, the reader should not be alarmed at this result. One only needs to understand what it means for stress energy to be negative within the proper context. Remember, they replaced the word exotic with negative, or they called it that from the beginning. Now let's read it this way. One only needs to understand what it means for stress energy to be exotic within the proper context. You see, when you word it that way, it sounds like there's freaking life out there. When you word it with negative, you see how that one word changes the whole view in your mind? That's the propaganda side of it. In my opinion, at least. You see how that one word changes your it changed my perception. I don't know about you guys, but it changed mine. Right? So again, notice, by the way, as well, what we'll find too is that, again, the one only needs to understand what it means for stress energy. Again, stress energy. Like a tensor, like an elastic band. Again, in, out. In, it goes in, and then it goes out. Just like Dan Winters' expand and contract spin circle. Again, maybe I'm wrong. I'm just basing off a speculation. By the way, we're just getting started. That's literally just the beginning. And the reason I say that is because we need to first understand that relative to what we're going to be looking at moving forward now. So, first and foremost, let's take a look at this right over here. So in the title, we have, of course, we're mistaking the map for the territory. So let me just lay that out for you one last time. The bed sheet, we think, is the territory, but it's really the map, right? Now think about, for example, if you're in the army, right? And your superior comes to you with a map and says, I need you to plan based on this map here. You place the map on a nice table, but the table you place it on has never been seen before. What ends up happening is, imagine you start making markings on the map, right? But the marker is a very thick permanent marker type ink. It goes through the map onto the desk. Imagine then you're like, okay, I marked up what I got to do. It's time for me to go get to deploy and do my mission. You start folding up your map. It's a paper map. You then remove the map from the table. You realize the table itself was a separately different map that represented a larger version of the smaller paper you were looking at. So now you realized, because of that permanent marker on the map, on your paper map, you've now placed permanent marker markings on the desk. That's also a map. But you now realize, holy crap, now that I see things differently, where I thought I was placing markers on the paper map, I was actually, say for example, I was placing markers on paper map point A. It turns out that that's not point A when I look at the desk map. That's point, I don't even know what that is. Do you see what I'm saying, folks, when I say we're mistaking the map for the territory? That's what I think. And I made that mistake many times. Now, speaking of which as well, we have to also understand, too, that we may have, I'm not saying we do, because unless I did it myself or I was in a lab and I saw it myself, I won't say that for sure, but we may have what's called internal sigils. Now, I say this because, again, going back to this concept of how these beings come in and out, Mr. Alexei Novitsky said something that I asked to use to quote from him, and I must give him the credit. He said this great. These other beings' habitats in the other dimensions, or the other frequencies, or the other dimensions vibrating at different frequencies. And imagine where this red dot is. This is the Earth plane, if you will. Our existence between other planes is a stillness for these other beings' habitat. This is just a thought, an idea that Mr. Alexei Novitsky pointed out. I would dare to say I very much agree with that, because if we go back to Staff Sergeant Clifford Stone's interview with Project Camelot in 2007, he claimed that we are all a part of the cosmos. We're all a piece of the cosmos, which would then subscribe to fractal cosmology, again, being a fractal of the source. But interestingly enough, again, with these other beings' habitats, whether these aliens or these ETs or other what have you, whether they like us or not, our stillness is what provides their survival. Now, you might be saying, Dave, is it possible that because we've been entrapped, that we are ensuring their survival because of that entrapment? Not always. There's other ones on different frequencies, I would dare to say, that need us to ascend for them to ascend, which is why some of them may in fact be helping us, although a case could be made that there are more quote-unquote bad ones than good ones. But again, you get my gist, the gist of it. Now, what's interesting, too, is that, according to Mr. Alexei Novitsky, gravity, in his opinion, is a synchronization of a harmonic light state. Now, we can argue that's possible. I mean, again, Einstein was allegedly the closest to discovering what light was, but he allegedly claimed that he couldn't by the time he passed away. Interestingly enough, though, it's possible maybe he did and it was covered up. But we see here, ancient-origins.net. Okay, we see 1,500-year-old magic bowls inscribed with spells seized in a Jerusalem raid. During a raid on a private home in Jerusalem's ultra-Orthodox Ramat Shlomo neighborhood, the Israel Antiquities Authority, IAA, seized a large cache of stolen or illegally excavated archaeological treasures that were destined to be sold on the black antiquities market. Among the items recovered were 3 magic incantation bowls, which would have been made sometime between the 4th and 8th centuries AD. Again, we see over here, hold on. Let's scroll down a little bit. In addition to the magic bowls, they also received other types of items. These items were decorated in Phoenician style with Egyptian motifs and included images of animals. Okay, so let's see here, for example, the secrets of ancient magic bowls revealed. The magic bowls date back about 1,500 years and were originally buried under the floors of houses in order to provide protection. Okay, so what we'll find here is that according to Amir Ganor, head of the IAA Robbery Prevention Unit, these magical bowls were not mass-produced, but instead customized to suit owner preferences. Quote, the text was written by artists for a specific client according to their personal needs, Ganor explained. Occasionally, as can be seen in one of the bowls, a figure of the night demon was painted in the center of the bowl, representing the individual that the bowl was meant to ward off, end quote. Now, also, I want to say too, what we'll find here is that, let's see here, the 3 bowls found during the IAA raid were written in Aramaic, a Semitic language spoken in ancient Mesopotamia. Nevertheless, they contain quotes in Hebrew from the Hebrew Bible, meaning they could have been made by Jewish customers who lived in Mesopotamia and spoke that language. All right? For IAA authorities, the ivory objects with Egyptian motifs were another notable discovery. These items were much older than the bowls, dating to almost 3,000 years in the past. One of the most striking of these objects featured a drawing of 2 griffins, winged lions with human faces, standing next to each other, while another included an inscription that spoke of a line of 4 winged lions marching in formation. Okay, it is believed that such items were used to decorate furniture and were especially common in the lands of ancient Israel in the 8th and 9th centuries BC. Okay, now, let me just say as well, this is going to sound a little bit, I guess you could say, esoteric, and you might think I'm a little bit nuts, even for the Patreon, truthfully, but actually maybe not. We'll see here. Hunting the black market hydra. Okay, so what we'll find is that this black market hydra, if you want to call it that, is a set. It is not one particular object. It is a set of these alleged magical objects, if you will. Now, to what intent this magic is derived from, it's hard to say. Maybe it is simply like a computer with respects to magic. People use computers for good to hack other people. Some people use computers for great things, donate money, do things like that. It could, again, as well, come down to intention with respects to this. However, one thing that I want to point out quite significantly is that, notice, by the way, and I quote, ivory artifacts of similar design and content have been discovered during past excavations in Samaria in the northern West Bank. Okay, now, again, a robbery prevention unit spokesperson said these artifacts were likely excavated illegally from a mound in one of these regions and had never actually been in the possession of museums or professional archaeologists. Now, I know that the West Bank is a river. It's not actually a bank, like a financial bank as we know it. Notice, though, the interesting lineups of words that seem to associate and come into play within certain contexts, okay, of certain events in life in general that have these words. Bank, hydra, again, having to do with very secretive magic bowls that were specified as well. Again, I'm not saying that I'm right. I'm just saying, notice how all the time, let's parallel this. Back in the day, they used to call these things, again, all these different, magic bowls, the lions with the human faces, all of that. That's not for me to say if that's a spiritual creature or maybe a DNA hybrid creature of sorts that manifested from, other dimensions to this one. It's hard to say. Point being is that notice the parallels between back then and today. Only difference is today, our modern quote-unquote government is using it. Using what, Dave? What are they using? The names. CERN, Alice, all of it. They're using the same words, the same names, Hydra. Almost as if, I don't know, there's an esoteric attachment to them. Having to do with intent, which is what would describe allegedly a sigil. A sigil would be that within chaos magic that science would describe as quote-unquote entropy, and in science, entropy is just random chaos within a certain vicinity. That would be able to describe the way in which one can use their brain and the microtubules in their brain to use telepathy and astral projection and remote viewing to create their own reality. Now, you might be saying, Dave, what do you mean create your own reality? Well, I would dare to say that you see what we described here about how these motherships vibrate from one to another? I would dare to say entire planes, new planes, could be manifested if anywhere from 3 to 15% of any given population within a certain geographical vicinity were to understand their sovereignty. Now, you might be saying, Dave, what do you mean understand their sovereignty? Literally what we're learning right now. If people truly grasp this, by definition, there would be a manifestation within their genetics and DNA that would prove the piezoelectric effect that would then create that ascended mode. Does that make sense, guys? I hope it does. Now, with that being said, let me give you a visual. You see how this would just be one way, I guess you could, not out, so to speak, but one way of doing it. You see how, let's just say this mothership doing this to get to Earth and all that, they're bad people. Let's just say bad individuals. Okay, we're on Earth, screw you guys. A couple of us, and when I say a couple, we'll say maybe a few million, we're going to go make our own new little plane right here. That would be one way. Now, that would be more running from the problem than facing it head on, so to speak. But again, do you see what I mean? The fact that we can do that makes sense. Now, you might be saying, okay, Dave, how can we do that? Well, let me show you, folks. Again, thank you so much to Brandy, Tricked by the Light. I don't need to go through this extensively because, again, we've been through this quite a lot. Understanding, extremely astrally dense vibrational strings, all of this. Now, notice this, by the way. This person talks about how they can create their own reality within on this planet, right? Using intent and manifestation, and they've been able to harness their powers, okay, in order to do that. Now, look at this. These guys understand how reality works, and they know that most people on Earth don't, because we've been knocked on the head with amnesia as a species. So they use our ignorance against us. They cannot possess someone who is strong-willed. They can't possess people like you and I who are realizing this. Okay? Now, notice this. Of course, we know that they feed off of fear and all of that, but this, again, I guess you could say, astral projector, dreamer, you name it. This is just one person. We can argue this is circumstantial. Dave, why are you going off of this entire whole thing here, so to speak? Because, again, we can't corroborate this. Well, if we're using what's called open source data, this dreamer said the more people get involved with meditating in a group, whether it's in a circle or squid, doesn't matter, the more people meditate in a group together with pure intent, or an intent towards, I guess you could say, anything really, you can then break free temporarily of some of the vibrational states that the War Department is using, or excuse me, the weapons industry branch is using to suppress us. And this tech was given to us by some of the negatively oriented ETs from the 1955 Greada Treaty. Now, to further that even more, let me rephrase that. Again, it said here, according to this dreamer, this astral projector, that the more people you get to meditate with you, remote view with you, astral project with you, the more of a pure energy field you can make. Doesn't that remind us of the way in which UFOs or alien craft tend to lift off? The way in which they create that energy bubble around them that voids space and time? Not only that, but I'd like to look this up with you folks in real time. There's a gentleman who has been on a few different shows before. He's going to be coming on our show in the next month or two, so I want to bring that up. Tom Matei, this gentleman right over here. Very nice gentleman, to my understanding. So he has a skill called upsight. He calls it upsight. That's not, anyways, but what we'll see here, if we go to the media section, right, we covered some of this before, by the way, but you'll find that, again, Mr. Matei has a natural ability, like some do, just like in anything else in life. Some people are better at math, some people are, yada, yada. He was able to remote view a bunch of grays, a handful of grays, on a craft. And these grays seem to be remote viewing villages down below, or towns on Earth. Okay? What's interesting, however, from this particular sketch is that Mr. Matei, we're going to ask him about this when he comes on the show, he said that there were a handful of greys that stopped remote viewing because they noticed him, almost as, and he could hear them in a way think, because allegedly these greys inhabit what's called thought forms, which would substantiate what this dreamer talks about. But point being, these greys were like, what the heck? And they stopped the remote viewing because they wanted to, because he was remote viewing them. He wasn't actually physically there, but he was remote viewing them. Now, he claimed that before these greys, a few of them noticed him. What they would do when they were remote viewing is, if, say they were remote viewing this person, but this person ends up walking, say, over here on representing the glass table, okay? The glass table representing Earth, which is kind of a different conversation in of itself. But point being, say this person walks over here, while the gray back here has trouble reaching to this end of the table. So when this gray can't remote view that far out, just because he can't see that far, this gray, for example, will take the place of this gray and remote view and take his place. Again, the more of the grays remote view, the more of an accurate depiction they got. Does that not remind us of a video game? Does that not remind us of what this astral projector claimed here? The more you meditate in a group, the more power you hold and you can manifest. I don't know, folks. It really makes you think, doesn't it? At least in my humble opinion, it does. Because it would explain why they want to constantly keep us in fear. Okay? So now that is called upsight. Interestingly enough, what I want to do is I want to go through, to sort of wrap this up, if you will, I want to go through a handful of different articles that will actually showcase some of what I've been discussing here, because I can discuss this all I want. I can pick certain examples and say, oh my God, look guys, but we need to look at what's going on in real time to see what's happening, in my humble opinion. So, let's take a look. Nodal.us. Deep learning is hitting a wall. What would it take for artificial intelligence to make real progress? Honestly, a soul. That's my opinion, but they don't have it. So again, well, when I say they, I'm talking about the ones that want this AI to move forward in a way. Now, this is what becomes even more interesting. Benzinga.com. Tokamak energy moves closer to commercial fusion. 100 million degree plasma is a world record for spherical tokamak. Okay, you know what I'm curious about? How the hell can they make something 100 million degrees Celsius, which is achieving a plasma temperature? And by the way, notice how the toroid field of the symbol of the company, it's right in our faces, guys. I mean, this is my humble opinion. But point being, they can do all of this. But somehow we can't. Again, we have trouble getting to the moon. We have trouble getting to Mars. It's a joke. It's a joke. But let's take a look here. Phys.org, March 10th, 2022. Magnetism helps electrons vanish in high-temperature superconductors. Oh, you mean like all of the experiences people had when they were called crazy and lost their pensions, lost their families, lost their lives for being called that? Now all of a sudden it's science? Huh. Interesting. And I get a little bit passionate, because there have been people, very kind people, who have just been doing their job, their duty. You know, Air Force pilots that claim to see such instances. They report it, trying to do the right thing. They get ridiculed. Their wives leave them. Their husbands leave them. And their kids leave them because they're considered crazy. That is absolutely despicable and deplorable. That people's lives will be destroyed in order to preserve this shit right here. Please forgive me for my profanity. Point being, let's see here. Superconductors, metals in which electricity flows without resistance, hold promise as the defining material of the near future, according to physicist Brad Ramshaw, and are already used in medical imaging machines, drug discovery research, and quantum computers being built by Google and IBM. Oh, how convenient. Yeah, the same companies that are in cahoots with, you know, this whole power structure. Yeah, okay, great. Anyways, let's take a look. However, the super low temperatures conventional superconductors need to function a few degrees above absolute zero, make them too expensive for wide use. Okay? In their quest to find more useful superconductors, All right, all these individuals and colleagues have discovered that magnetism is key to understanding the behavior of electrons in high-temperature superconductors. With this finding, they've solved the 30-year-old mystery surrounding this class of superconductors which function at much higher temperatures, greater than 100 degrees above absolute zero. Okay, this paper was called The Fermi Surface Transformation at the Pseudogap Critical Point of a Cuprate Superconductor, published in the Nature Physics magazine March 10th of 2022. And I quote, "A central mystery to high-temperature superconductors is what happens with their electrons," Ramshaw said, one of the professors. "All metals have electrons, and when a metal becomes a superconductor, the electrons pair up with each other," he said. "We measure something called the Fermi surface, which you can think of as a map showing where all the electrons are in a metal. To study how electrons pair up in high-temperature superconductors, researchers continuously change the number of electrons through a process known as chemical doping." All right? The researchers zeroed in on this critical point to figure out what makes the electrons vanish and where they go. Interestingly enough, these electrons seem to vanish from the Fermi surface map, but they don't vanish entirely. Again, does that not remind us of we're mistaking the map for the territory? We're only seeing one small, I guess you could say, variation or version of this map, which represents really the larger territory. Now, the researchers zeroed in on this critical point to figure out what makes the electrons vanish and where they go. They used the strongest steady-state magnet in the world, the 45 Tesla hybrid magnet at the National High Magnetic Field Laboratory in Tallahassee, Florida, to measure the Fermi surface of a copper oxide high-temperature superconductor as a function of electron concentration right around the critical point. It was just as if we were looking at a real map and all of a sudden most of the continents just disappeared. You want to know why I'm taking a deep breath? I'm getting goosebumps, guys, because I got two things to point out to you here. You remember when in the episode with the astrophysicist recently, for those that watched it, with Mr. Alexei, he said it was proposed that magnetism was in fact had its own spectrum. I believe this was proposed by I don't want to say who, but scientists from long ago. Magnetism, or magnets and magnetism, had its own spectrum, just like light has its own spectrum, the light spectrum. That was ridiculed. Why? Because if the magnetic spectrum were to be divulged and revealed to the masses, you know what would be able to happen? This right over here. Except all of us could do it. All of us, you and me. Hop in a craft right now, let's go. That I'm not kidding, folks. And I say that because look at this. Excuse me. Most of the here we go. That's what we found happens to the Fermi surface of high-temperature superconductors at the critical point. Most of the electrons in a particular region, a particular part of the map, vanish. Oh, you mean like this, by the way? How they go from here and just disappear, for example? Boom. Why? Because they vibrated to another state. Another density. They've aligned their harmonics with another frequential state in which is not attuned to the one in which they were originally in. That's just my take. I could be wrong, right? Look at this. It was important for the researchers to note not just that electrons were vanishing, but which ones in particular. Which ones in particular, almost as if these electrons knew where to go. Almost as if there was a consciousness to them that sort of is like allegedly the same consciousness in our minds with piezoelectricity that is being covered up. Which, speaking of that, syncedreview.com, meet TQP, the first query processor to run on tensor computation runtimes, delivers up to 20 times speedups over CPU-only systems. A research team from the University of Washington, UC San Diego, and Microsoft prototypes Tensor Query processor, a query processor that runs atop tensor computation runtimes, specializes in GPU solutions and all of that. Now, notice this. These are all, big words, letters, acronyms, all of that. A query processor that runs atop tensor computation runtimes. Tensors, quarks and tensors. These are the new words for what James Maxwell had already figured out as it pertains to dark matter, exotic matter, energy, all of that. That's what James Maxwell found out. And I'm sure he wasn't the first human to do it. He's probably maybe one of the first modern ones relative to this time period. But again, it was completely butchered away and removed immediately. All of a sudden, look, physicsworld.com, March 11th of this year. Time crystals on a quantum computer reach record size. Ah, how convenient. Quantummagazine.org. Will transformers take over artificial intelligence? A simple algorithm that revolutionized how neural networks approach language is now taking on vision as well. It may not stop there. Again, there's the eye, there's the triangle, and also from the sake of, again, marketing and propaganda and disseminating this into one's mind. Interesting that they use these shapes, but okay, let's put that to the side for a second. Take a look at this. A versatile new hammer is a kind of artificial neural network, a network of nodes that learn how to do some task by training on existing data called a transformer. The transformer first appeared in 2017 in a paper that cryptically declared that, quote, attention is all you need. Yes, to put you into another metaverse, to seduce you and make you a slave, attention is all you need. What you need is intention. That this is just my opinion, right? Now, look at this, by the way. This versatile new hammer is a kind of artificial neural network, a network of nodes that learn how to do some task by training on existing data. Network of nodes, for those that, again, watched the episode where Alexei, the astrophysicist came on, I asked him about something that's been discussed on Kurt J. Mungel's theory of everything lately, which was that some argue, and I don't know what the answer is, but some argue that the transition states to those nodes is actually more significant than the actual node in which you're getting to. You might be saying, okay, Dave, what do you mean by that? Well, let's go back here for a quick second. Some physicists are postulating that the transition, this blue line, is more important than the objective of where you want to go. Why? I'll be honest with you folks. Scientifically, I can't say, but in my mind personally, maybe some of you can actually relate this in other ways. In my personal mind, I think of the old phrase in philosophy, the joy is in the journey. Enjoying the process is what's part of life. Living life is what's a part of it all, right? So, I don't know. That's just my philosophical connection there, if that makes sense. Now, excuse me. Let's take a look. Nanowork.com, En route to 3D printing with atomic resolution. When two or more 2D materials are placed on top of each other, their properties change, and a material with novel hybrid properties emerges. These materials are called van der Waals heterostructures because the atomically thin layers are not mixed through a chemical reaction, but rather attached to each other via a weak, so-called van der Waals interaction, similar to how a sticky tape attaches to a flat surface. When two or more 2D materials are placed on top of each other, does that not remind us of, again, there are things in which calculations can do that geometry cannot? Does this not remind us of topology and Project Carrot? Take a look at this. Let's zoom in a little bit. Because you might be saying, Dave, where's this Project Carrot relation? Okay. Researchers, let me see, hold on. By stacking different combinations of 2D materials, and I quote, researchers can create new materials with new properties. These properties can be precisely controlled by twisting the stacked atomic layers, opening the way for the use of this unique degree of freedom for the nanoscale control of composite materials and nano devices in future technologies. Researchers usually stack 2D materials using a stacking medium as support. This method requires a transfer medium in contact with the layers, and in some cases, a chemical removal of the transfer layer. This prevents the patterning of the layers on a true atomic scale, which is only possible if the layers are freestanding membranes. Okay, so hold on a second. It seems like, researchers at the University of Tübingen, Germany, have overcome these limitations. Now, by the way, all you got to do is follow the money with these universities, and you'll find that it points literally right back to this. Literally. So let me, please excuse me 1 second. Here we are. And I quote, we can create almost arbitrary 3D structures by stacking atomically thin materials similar to a 3D printing process where each atomic layer can be chosen from the vast library of available 2D materials. Oh my gosh. It's nano pattern stacking using Project Carrot. This is a real watered down version of what that whistleblower said on bibliothecaplates.net, where he said, think of a word, the word hello, it has the letters HELO. Now the next word you think of cannot have those same words or those same letters in that word. So say you think of the word I don't know, gray, and the letters are GREY. Okay, so now for the third word, the letters in that third word cannot have any of the letters of the last two words. You see how complicated that is? That's extremely advanced. Like that's not even, yeah, that's big. Point being, I would dare to say that this right here is a watered down version of that, which would explain topological AI, topological mesh networking. Topology, for those who don't know, is actually something having to do with nodes or points of interest being horizontal in their power structure when they communicate instead of vertical. So they're not relying on one node to give the command all the way down. If one node dies, sort of like a hydra, multiple heads of the snake, if one node dies, the rest can continue. Does that not also, by the way, remind us of, excuse me, this right here, magnetisms help electrons vanish? This would be one way in which you could do this. You have, and electrons know what to think, they can think based on and learn based on previous data. They'll know what they have to do in order to maintain their survival. But they don't have a soul. But they know from previous data the goal is to survive. That would be AI right there. I mean, this is just my opinion, folks. This is just my opinion. So, again, then we see, for example, SingularityHub.com, Moore's Law. Scientists just made a graphene transistor gate the width of an atom. Oh, again. Excuse me, sorry. Interesting. More and more articles like this, isn't it? Let's see here. TheLancet.com. Orally active, clinically translatable senolytics restore aclotho in mice and humans. And aclotho is a geroprotective protein. It's basically de-aging. Notice how they put it in The Lancet, which is the same journal. I got to stop it there, actually. This is not a members episode, sorry. SciTechDaily.com. Quantum memory, 2D material identified that can store quantum information at room temperature. You see what I mean, guys? If one node goes away, let's zoom in very quickly. This may not be the best example. Again, these don't necessarily okay. If one goes away, it then passes on the data to the other one, which then passes to the other, and so on and so forth, right? Whereas instead of there being, say, one node right above here, just giving the orders to all these ones, they're now horizontally integrated, which would be topology, and you could do that for basically telephones, every form of communication, you name it. Now look at this. Cornell University, March 15th, 2022. One network doesn't rule them all. Moving beyond handcrafted architectures in self-supervised learning. Again, talking about how one network doesn't rule them all. That's that blockchain, that's that topology, that's that mesh networking, right? Now, speaking of which, in5d.com, why are these 32 symbols found in ancient caves all over Europe? You want to know most often, at least today, maybe again, geographical boundaries could have changed and what have you, but do you want to know the most amount of where these symbols were found on, at least relative to current findings? What was found in Israel? The magic bowls and all of that. Makes you think, doesn't it? I mean, certainly does, right? Then we see here, spectrum.ieee.org, 12 graphs that explain the state of AI in 2022. The 2022 AI Index talks jobs, investments, ethics, and more. Right? We see here again, investment is off the hook thanks to AI. The US versus China narrative is complicated. Applying for a patent and getting it are two separate things. A plateau in computer vision. Oh my, God forbid, big tech plateaus. AI isn't ready for law school. You see all of this. So now, we jump over here, phys.org, in the last week, toward a quantum computer that calculates molecular energy. By the way, notice how Google's involved? Again, you see the same companies, folks? And we're going to see, by the way, what they're going to call it. They're going to call it a name that has to do, I guess you could say, with some type of ancient, esoteric, whatever you want to call it. anything that has some type of esoteric intentive attachment to its name that provides a sort of vibrational state that allows the ascension of this to be created. Okay, now look at this here. TheVerge.com. AI suggested 40,000 new possible chemical weapons in just 6 hours. For me, the concern was just how easy it was to do. There was an experiment, right? It took less than 6 hours for drug developing AI, and I quote, to invent 40,000 potentially lethal molecules. Researchers put AI, normally used to search for helpful drugs, into a kind of bad actor mode to show how easily it could be abused at a biological arms control conference. Interesting. Right? Now, this also speaks to a larger picture of propaganda, in my humble opinion, pertaining to esoteric propaganda. From the astral travelers, their writings here, maintaining the energetic balance. From a propaganda perspective, you put this in The Verge because you know lots of eyes are going to see it, right? So it creates that whole thing, oh, maybe we should slow down on AI, which then creates that reintroduction into one's sovereignty and soul, but not too much, because you don't want people realizing they're in a trap of some kind. Whatever that trap is, that's not for me to say personally. Right? So they'll put this out to maintain that esoteric balance, because you need a little bit of positivity in order for there to be negativity, as above so below, unfortunately. But again, we can argue that's what makes the balance of life, which is also what makes us food for some of these entities, in my opinion. Speaking of which, unknownboundaries.com. History Channel experts can't identify cube-shaped object captured by pilot on video. History Channel experts can't identify, just like National Geographic photographers are forced to sign NDAs when they go deep-sea diving for pictures. Why? Why do you have to sign an NDA if there's nothing to hide down there? Okay, we'll leave it at that. Let's go over here. Howandwise.com. 200,000-year-old ancient city found in Africa. Is it Anunnaki structures before the flood? Why do I bring this up? Author Zecharia Sitchin was the first person, and I quote, who highlighted the subject of Anunnaki. He titled in his book The Earth Chronicles, and according to him, an ET race known as the Anunnaki arrived on Earth for gold from the mystical planet Nibiru, located beyond Neptune. If Sitchin is correct, then wouldn't there be evidence of their legacy on Earth? While the ruins of the ancient city discovered in Africa could be the missing link to the Anunnaki. Now, there's this whole there's this alleged, concept that with gold and all of that, after the plasma apocalypse allegedly occurs and the Earth flushes itself out, people turn into gold. And when I say people, I mean non-humans. There's been speculation of that these are actually the remnants, again, of some of the beings, not the buildings. That's why I bring this up, because you'll find strange electromagnetic states within these buildings. Not saying that that's inferring to any type of biological inference or conclusion, but we see here, many people believe, and I quote, that this ancient metropolis could have been a part of some larger complex that encompasses an even greater area of 10,000 square kilometers. It could be part of a larger complex, but remember entropy, which is chaos within a certain vicinity, or energy or actions within a certain, or randomness as they call it, which I don't think it is, but again, that's what on the surface we call it. That could be this right over here, because again, it stops at 10,000 square kilometers. The geology of the site is also interesting because it is situated beside numerous gold mines. What if the gold is the blood of these beings? Or is the body of these beings? Hard to say. Hard to say. Again, so folks, with that being said, I would like to thank all of you so very kindly. This has been normally the Let's Get Bands are probably 30-40 minutes, but I felt very, very excited, and I felt obligated and committed to report this to you today. So again, this should be the first episode that I'll be releasing a little bit later on Sunday, because I've just been recording so much I don't have the time to even upload an episode yet. But once you see this, you can expect right after this there will be a couple more coming. So thank you so very much, folks, and we'll catch you all very, very soon. Cheers.